I need to tell you about the bedroom tax demo. There are 50 demonstrations going on around the country today against the bedroom tax, which is absolutely brilliant. There is one happening in Sheffield, and it's at 1 o'clock outside the town hall. Now that's during our lunch break, and obviously we've got quite a small lunch break, but I'm sure most of us here will be really happy to go and join that. The town hall, if you're not familiar with Sheffield, is just behind the Novotel. It's a couple of minutes walk from here. So please, we're urging as many people as possible to go up at 1 o'clock to join that protest. And there are loads of cafes around there, so you'll be able to grab a quick sandwich and then be able to come back here for the afternoon's workshop. We're also hoping from this session and this afternoon to elect a steering committee of people to take Unite the Resistance forwards. That's something that we will discuss throughout the day. But just to let you know at this point that if you think, oh yeah, I'd like to get involved in that, please be ready to volunteer, because we will be needing volunteers for that. Okay, now just to introduce the speakers. So the speakers are going to speak for about 10 minutes each. So first of all, we have Ronnie, who's from the Bakers Union. He's the General Secretary of the Bakers Union. But actually, he's going to speak second. Because if I look at my list, the first speaker is going to be Martin Mayer, who's on the National Executive of Unite and a Sheffield bus worker. Then we have on the third speaker is going to be Karen Reisman, who is a health worker. The fourth speaker will be Alan Gibbons, who is a children's author and a campaigner. And the fifth speaker will be Mark Savotka from the PCS. So we've got a fantastic group of speakers. And then when they've finished their 10 or so minutes introductory speeches, there'll be time for people to come in and join a wider debate. So I'm going to introduce Martin Mayer. Martin is also on the executive of Unite, and he's also on Sheffield Trades Council. He's going to kick off the discussions this morning. So Martin Mayer.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks very much, and good morning, comrades, brothers and sisters, and thanks to Karen. First of all, let's just think now, we're just over halfway through this condemned government's term of office. And there's still far too many working class people who have bought the line that austerity is a necessary evil. Now that's not to say we haven't been doing our job as trade unionists and as activists on the left. We've done a lot of stuff. Our unions, many of our unions, my union, Mark's union, many of the unions that are represented here today have been leading the fight back against the cuts, and we've set up anti-cuts alliances like the one here in Sheffield. The Trades Council movement has been working flat out, but the fact is we've still got a huge amount of work to do. And when you look at it, the level of propaganda that has been thrown at working people through the media has been second to none. We've not seen anything like it, I believe, in this country before. So let's start to demolish some of these lies, or perhaps I'll be generous, I'll call them myths. Now the first myth, of course, is that the deficit is all Labour's fault. It was 13 years of profligate Labour rule, just spending money willy-nilly. Of course that isn't actually true. What happened was we had a right-wing Labour government that did believe in balancing the budget, and it did actually reduce that deficit to historically low levels until the banks collapsed. And it was the collapse of the banks that, whether you agree with what Labour did or not, that caused the budget deficit that we have today, transferring that private sector debt to the public sector, because, frankly, we were 4 days away from you not being able to get money out of your ATMs. We wouldn't be able to pay the wages of the workers. We would have had an economic collapse. And Labour did actually act. We will criticise some of the things they did, of course, but that was the truth of that particular myth. The second myth is that when the Tories took over in 2010, the situation was even worse than they were expected. It was a black hole. The finances of the the nation had gone worse and worse and worse, and it was a shock when they took office. Actually, now this is very interesting. This is completely and utterly untrue, because about 6 months before the election, the government's deficit was £176 billion. And by the government of the day not making any cuts at all, just keeping spending as it goes, quite cynically, they said they were going to make massive cuts when they got in, just like the Tories, but in that 6 months' time, the deficit actually reduced to £153 billion. And it's a very important fact, this, because we now come to the next myth. The next myth is that the only way you reduce the deficit is by massive public spending. Well, hang on. That public spending didn't reduce. We kept the economy bubbling, and the deficit reduced on its own accord. And that's because, of course, we know as left-wingers that the economics of our country depends on public sector intervention in the economy. And if you spend money on behalf of the nation, you stimulate the economy, you keep people in work, taxes come in, unemployment benefit goes down. And that is, of course, the story of what's happened since then, with the deficit getting bigger, as we all know, and with the economy not recovering, in spite of the fact we're told that there's no alternative but to these massive spending cuts. Because, of course, the myth number 4 is that tax cuts for the rich are actually the answer for our economy. If you notice Liam Fox now, the ultra-right-wing baron at the back of the David Cameron, actually saying, oh, your AAA rating's gone, chaps, the only solution now is to intensify the cuts so that we can make room for those public spending, those tax cuts for the rich. That will stimulate the economy. Well, of course, we know that that's not true, and our message to the society as a whole, but particularly to our working class that we represent, has to be to counter this nonsense. So let's talk about the alternatives. That's so important. In the political vacuum that we exist on the left, we have to unite round a set of alternatives which will inspire working people and hopefully influence our Labour Party to adopt them, for God's sake, when they're running for election. But the first thing is, the 1930s solution, which is what they're doing now, does not work. Look what happened in the 1930s. Massive public spending cuts, huge unemployment, the rise of fascism, and degeneration into a very unstable international situation which led to the Second World War. And in 1945, the one really progressive Labour government that we all know about did actually recognise that that was not the answer. The left-of-centre economists like Keynes at the time were pointing out that at the time of big financial deficits, that what you need to do is use the public sector as the motor for recovery. And of course, the rest is history. The build-up of the council houses, the expenditure on the health service, and all the other public spending actually regenerated the economy. It put people back to work. It regenerated the capitalist economy, for goodness sake. So what we need to say is, look, first of all, there's £100 billion worth of tax that is not collected, it's evaded or it's avoided by the rich and powerful in our society. Mark, I give credit to your union for the research that you've done on this, taking on this particular item, which I think is so vital. Just getting a proportion of that would eliminate the deficit that we have today. So first of all, that proves that cuts are not the answer. But yet, let's use the money that we can sustain either from those tax, recovery by tax, or from the borrowing, which we could easily do at very low rates of interest now, to regenerate the economy. And that needs spending on council houses. Houses is a real issue for working people, particularly now. But we also need sustainable growth. And I'll give credit to the climate on 1 million climate jobs. Please buy this booklet, because it's a very, very good examination of the sustainable growth that we can actually be doing, whether that's putting money into green industry like public transport, or insulation into our homes, or renewable energy. These create jobs, they stimulate the economy. It is the answer. It is the answer to what we're trying to do. So, when we're talking about this, of course, we need to prepare the fight back. And I know our other colleagues will want to talk to you about that a bit more, and my time is going to be limited. But we need to talk about building the resistance, building people's understanding, and through struggle, educating people about those alternatives. I give credit to PCS. You've got a strike coming up this week on Wednesday, Mark. The whole trade union movement needs to be there behind you and showing solidarity with that dispute and the other disputes that are there to come. We need to build coordinated action, and I'm really pleased with unions like ours, Mark, that are talking seriously on the TUC General Council at the moment about preparing for a general strike. There may not be the mood for it at the moment. If I'm realistic, I don't think my members at Sheffield Buses would understand if I said to them we're coming out on a general strike now. But when you think what's about to happen this year, when the cuts really start to bite, councils, this Sheffield Council, £50 million worth of cuts. Have you seen the scale of council cuts in Birmingham and some of the other cities? This is devastating to our local economies and to the people that work in them. But also the benefit cuts. And we've got a demonstration, as Karen's just said, at lunchtime about this disgusting, absolutely disgusting bedroom tax. But all the other benefit cuts that's going to come in as well are really going to hit working people and people out of work extraordinarily hard. We will see people turned out of their homes. And as the mood changes in this particular year now, halfway through this Condemned government, you will see a change in working people's attitude towards these cuts. And I know that if we keep on doing the work we're doing, building the resistance, we will be able to get a roller coaster of opposition with the working class, overturning this austerity. It really can be achieved. And together, I know we can work together. Thanks very much.
Just want to check, can everybody hear clearly enough at the backs of the room?
Yes.
Yes, I can see you nodding. If you're having difficulty, there are some seats at the front here, and also to the people that are stood round the side if you want to sit down. There are still some seats available. Our next speaker is going to be Draper from the Bakers Union.
I hope it will be. Thanks, Karen. First of all, can I say I'm proud to be given the opportunity to address like-minded people. People who are visionaries, who understand exactly the damage that is being done by this government, and also the damage that's being done and being portrayed by the right-wing press, and we all know who own them and who they dance to, or who dances to them. So I'm really proud to be here. But I'm also proud to represent a relatively small union, 23,000, but a union that is committed to change. If you look at our agenda every year at our conference, it isn't just about the food industry. You know, it's so broad, the things that we talk about, and with passion, you'll see that everybody who's there really is committed to not only changing this government. In fact, I suppose like Mark's union, we're involved in more fights than Montgomery was during the war. You know, we're taking everybody on at the moment. It doesn't say there's ballot forms dropping right, left and centre, but what the hell. Representing workers in what's supposed to be the saviour sector. We don't work in the public sector, we work in the private sector, and we're the ones who are supposed to take up the slack. When the government and the councils slash and burn public services jobs, we're going to be the saviours, we're going to be the people who are going to take all these jobs in. It's a joke. It's an absolute joke. We're probably getting more redundancies in the private sector than you are in the public sector. We're most certainly having more attacks on terms and conditions. We've recently, not so long ago, just down the road, our members in Sheffield here showed that there is a spirit for a fight. A relatively moderate branch who, attacked by their employer, balloted a 92% turnout for a ballot with a 96% vote. But they never got there because that spirit and that will to fight an employer who was trying to oppress them and take away their terms and conditions, he capitulated, not our workers. And we demonstrated, and I'm sure that on the 20th of March when Mark's union goes out, that if we do really get behind them, it's okay standing here and saying we're going to do it, we've got to get behind these unions, we've really got to show our support. That's the way that we can succeed in the future. You know, in 1381, bakers and farmers and food workers, people who worked on the land of this country, took part in the peasant's revolt. They backed Wat Tyler, people who I suppose traditionally would have been members of our union, who fought against their oppressors. And 700 years later, we've still got exactly the same things happening. We're still facing oppressors. When we talk about a benefit system, it's a benefit system that's propping up corrupt employers as well. It's enabling them to pay absolutely dross wages. So it isn't just a cut on people who are unemployed. It isn't just an attack on disabled. It isn't just an attack on pensions. It's an attack on the very, very fabric of the workplace in Britain. That's what's happening under this government. You know, down the centuries, we've had lots of heroes that we've looked at. You know, the Tolpuddle martyrs, the Chartists, the suffragettes, and yeah, the PCS workers who are going to go out and struggle on the 20th and continue to be a thorn in the government side, and long may that continue. But it really needs us all supporting. There's nothing that we ever got in the workplace that was just given to us. We've fought, we've campaigned, we've took strike action, we've had protests, we've had demonstrations like this, and that's how we've achieved not only the terms and conditions we've got, but also the welfare benefits that help protect our society. It's a class war, comrades, and it's a class war that's still raging throughout this country, and we've got to do something about it. As trade unions, we're not demanding the impossible. We're asking the people to put before profit. It's not a lot to answer for. The profit makers get exactly the same share as the profit takers, because that's been the problem in the past, that the greedy employers are taking all the finances out of business. As I said before, the employer who was going to take our members out in Sheffield, going to take the money, wants to cut their pensions, cut their terms and conditions, take overtime payments away, all the traditional things that we'd fought for years. He wanted to take them away because he thought it would protect the business. That same employer, him and his wife both took £12 million bonus that year. 24 million out of business. Now, it's a struggling business, that's not the way you do it. The year before, in fairness, got to give them some credit, the year before they didn't take quite as much. They took 23 million a year. And that's the sort of things that we're facing. Premier Foods, massive employer. It's a sham of a company the way it's run. Michael Clark brought him from South Africa, paid millions to be headhunted. They get him in, and all he does is loses thousands of jobs within there, loses loads of contracts, and then he buggers off with millions of pounds as a golden handshake. That's the reality. It always amazes me how when it comes to getting the best employers and getting the best directors and entrepreneurs, we've got to pay millions of pounds to get them. And yet when it comes to us and the people that we represent, you've got to lower the wages right down to the bottom to engender competitiveness. That's what's going to keep you your jobs, by being on low money. It's crazy the way it works. Comrades, we really have got a choice to make. We either accept the attacks that are being waged upon us by government, councils and employers, and we live our life on our knees. Or we fight back and we rise up, and at least we die with pride and stood on our feet. We have to fight back if we're going to stop this constant attack on terms and conditions and benefits. We have to fight back if we want to stop the disproportionate attacks that are being waged on the poor people in society. We have to fight back if we're going to stop the demonisation by the likes of the Chancellor of the Poor. You know, the TUC Congress in September, there was a really interesting debate, and I know Mark and I both got involved with it. And that was the POA motion on a general strike. It was the feasibility, to look at the feasibility of a general strike. And on the Sunday when I got to Brighton, I was sat outside the hotel. I'd just arrived on the Sunday, and one of my delegates had bought me a pint. I don't really drink, but I had a pint. And a general secretary, should we say, from a union that isn't like our union, came over and said to me, "What do you think about the Trotsky doing this motion?" I said, "Well, actually, you know, we've been asked to second it." Which, in fairness, we were going to do, until it became favourable then amongst a lot of the bigger unions, that, oh yeah, that's, you know, people seem to be clamouring for a general strike or looking at this, so we want to do it. So in the end, we didn't second it, but most certainly supported it wholeheartedly. But when you hear within the trade union, one particular general secretary, and from a big union, I'm not going to mention it, was to get on the stage in front of hundreds of conference delegates and say, you know, I don't think we should look at this at all, the feasibility of a general strike, because we tried it once and it didn't work. I'm just glad my mother never used the same sort of thinking. I might not have been here. Well, it took longer in Scotland to get through last week than the United Resistance. can I say that in April, though, you know, we are going to do something about it. I say we're a relatively small union, but we do a lot of thinking, we do a lot of talking. In April, we are going to be balloting all our members to see what their thoughts are on the feasibility of a general strike. So, if the TUC haven't got the balls to do it, then we as a trade union will be doing it. We'll be balloting. Trade union leaders really must lead from the front and not wait to be called upon by their troops. We really have got to take this battle forward. As I said, the TUC really do have to grow some balls and help us out. We're not saying a general strike, and I agree with Martin, I don't think that people are going to be jumping, oh, where's it been, you know, why haven't we got this straight away? I do think it's a difficult thing to achieve. But there's one thing for sure, if we don't ask the question, we'll definitely never know the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
Never, if we don't actually ask it. But of course, it's not something that the trade union movement's going to be able to do on its own. We're a body of about 6.25 million. And a lot of the time, we can't even think together. We can't join together. But if we did, can you imagine how powerful a movement that would be? And then look at all the community groups. DIPAC representing the disabled, you know, Unite the Resistance, Reclaim Our Right. Every week I get 5 or 6 new appeals dropping on my desk from protest groups who really do want to have a go against this government. Imagine if we absolutely harnessed all that together, what we'd be able to achieve together. I think we have to have a coalition of resistance. Bring everybody together. And as you know, I think as that thing gathers momentum, because it is going to take time. It's not going to be a light switch that we turn on, or a click of the fingers. It's going to have to gather momentum. But I think as it gathers momentum, I think even the right of the party and the right of the movement, and even those right-minded people within society are going to start then being enthused. They'll start thinking there is an opportunity to do something here, and will join us there. So, success, comrades. I don't care whether the unions join, whether they're right, left, or indifferent. I just hope that we all get together. You know, the old saying, "Success has many fathers, and failure has an orphan," is very true. There'll be lots of people who stand up and say, "Yeah, we were going to do that all the time," but at this moment, it's not apparent. So we've got to make sure that we channel those people down the way that we're thinking. Comrades, if we want to rebuild our welfare state, protect our NHS, give our kids hope for the future, and stop the heinous destruction of everything that we've ever fought for and voted for and protested for, then we need to fight. We need to change a political system that's corrupt. It's a political system that says that every 5 years that we've got to go along and we've got to elect the best of a bad bunch, because very often that's what we're facing. I'm not saying all MPs are bad, because I know many really great MPs, people like John MacDonald, who chairs our parliamentary group, who does absolutely fantastic work, not only on behalf of our union, but many other unions, and of course on behalf of working people. Our demands, well, they've got to become a manifesto issue. If somebody wants your vote, they want you to put a cross come 2015, or during the council election, then you make sure that those people are going to be putting a cross in your box, or a tick in your box. If we want our aspirations to become a reality, then we've got to push them, not just become some idle promise that's there to gather votes. We don't want a Labour Party in the future that's just going to be another shade of blue. I'm a lifelong member of the Labour Party. I want the Labour Party to deliver what I want and what my family wants, my friends and the people that I represent want. That's the type of Labour Party. We've got to change it from the inside. But I want to finish off by saying that, you know, our union only supports MPs. We only sponsor MPs. You keep seeing all this in the Tory press about unions supporting, propping up the Labour Party. Well, I'm telling you now, we support the MPs who support us, the ones who actually aspire to the same things that we aspire to. We might be a small union, but I'll tell you what, we make a lot of noise in Parliament. How long may that continue? There'll be things that will change in legislation because our members have took that struggle and took on the fight. We're on a journey to succeed. I want you all to come with us. Solidarity, comrades.
Thank you very much, Ronnie. Again, to say to people that are around the side, if you want a seat, there are some seats in the middle and towards the front, so do come and try and find one. I've just had a message past me saying there's over 200 people attending today, which is brilliant, and a lot more registered who haven't been able to come. So we're really pleased with that turnout, and I think it's an excellent basis to build the kind of resistance that the speakers so far have talked about. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who's Karen Reisman. She's a health worker. She was victimised herself for her trade union activities and was part of a campaign to fight against that. And she's also on the executive of, is it Unison? Of Unison. So please welcome Karen Reisman.
You always have to say when you're in Unison that I am speaking in a personal capacity at this meeting. Which is a shame really, because I do think we are in a position where we are facing the biggest crisis of my lifetime. Nowhere has it ever been so bad in terms of the way the world is at the moment. And I do think that the choice that the Tories have made to impose austerity on us is a choice. They present it as this is something that they have to do, but it is a choice. Just a couple of things in terms of tax. I'm sure Mark can do it better because he's done it. But you know, they could just collect the tax that they don't collect rather than sack tax collectors, and that would wipe off half the debt that they have at the moment. They could just scrap Trident, which would pay for for 120,000 nurses for 10 years, just scrapping Trident. So they have choices about what they're doing, and they're making choices. And it's not a surprise that a Tory government that never agreed with the welfare state, that never believed in council housing and education for the likes of us, that never believed in a health service for us, is choosing to use this crisis to attack the things that they never liked to do. To be honest, what they're doing to the health service has only just begun. In most of the other sectors of the public sector, they started the cuts right from the beginning. And there is this crazy debate that I hear in the papers at the moment, with the government saying maybe we should stop the ring fencing of the health service. Let's be clear, this government is cutting £20 million from the health service budget over the course of this government, which is more than any government anywhere in the world has ever cut in the period of 4 years. So it is a huge, massive cut. And the fact that they're discussing coming back for more is just a sign of what they're doing in terms of that their austerity is not working, so let's do more of it. And it is having a devastating impact. They have not stopped the privatisation, they have accelerated the privatisation, which is making it worse. PFI beds cost 4 times as much as NHS beds. The private contractors that put in for bids bleed money out of the health service. So for all the money that Labour put in, because they put it in under the market and under the private sector, half of that was bled out to those people, which means that ordinary people never benefited from the health service for that. And the Tories are doing more of that. In Manchester, where I live, Arriva buses have just taken over the ambulance passenger transport service. That's the sort of thing that privatisation in the health service is doing at the moment, and it is getting worse. But the other thing is just the scale of the cuts. We are now talking about, I've worked in the health service for 31 years, it's not always been the best job in the world, but it has been a job that you felt you would have for life. They are now talking about wholesale redundancies, including compulsory redundancies. So at Bolton, where I work, there are 500 compulsory redundancies, 12.5% of the workforce. Liverpool Acute, 500 redundancies. Warrington, 200 redundancies. Things that we have never come across in the health service before we are facing because of the scale of what they're attacking. They are rationing services and cutting back what you're entitled to. They are now saying that the old district hospital system that's been in place since 1948, that was good enough on the back of the Second World War when our country was completely devastated, is unaffordable in the 21st century and undesirable in the 21st century. So they're now talking about closing closing up to a third of district general hospitals, right, which is on the cards and what they're talking about over the next few years. And I think what is horrific about that is at the same time as they're doing that, and the service is getting worse because our services are being cut, instead of claiming responsibility for it, they're attempting to blame the people who work in the health service for being responsible. We see the right-wing press with story after story about uncaring nurses. And I say there are times where we are uncaring, but we're not uncaring because we want to be uncaring. We're uncaring because there aren't enough of us to be caring. You've got 5 or 6 people saying, can I please? And you know they're all desperate and there's only one of you to do it. You have to make choices, and that means saying to 4 or 5 of them, I'm not looking, I'll be there with you in a minute. And that is soul destroying to work in and soul destroying to use. And I think what's so disgraceful about what's going on at the moment, you look at the Mid Staffordshire Hospital that were driven by government policy to become a foundation trust. To do that they had to be financially viable. To be financially viable they had to make cuts, so they made cuts because that was their priority. When patients complained they ignored it, when relatives complained they ignored it, when staff complained they ignored it, and between 400 and 1,200 additional people died in a 3 and 4 year period who should never have died because of the cuts that they made. And did one manager take responsibility for that? No. Did one senior person who's on a fat salary who claims to be supervising and checking what we're doing? No. But individual nurses and individual members of staff have been scapegoated. And you see scapegoating now happening right across the country. They're attempting to turn every hospital into a Mid Staffordshire hospital where 400 to 1,200 people will die, and it will be us who die because we haven't got the private health insurance that the millionaire MPs and their mates have. It's always us who pay the price, and it's always us who get scapegoated. And it doesn't matter whether it's the poor or people on benefits or unemployed or Romanians or Bulgarians who might come here or Muslims or asylum seekers. There is no sort of end to the list of people that they're prepared to blame for the problems that exist in society, apart from the people who are really responsible, which is the bankers and the capitalists and the systems. Just the 200 people in this room that know that. So I don't quite agree with the previous 2 speakers about where people are at. Because my feeling is people know you can't just do nothing anymore. Doing nothing is not good enough, because life doesn't just stay still if you do nothing. You're on the edge of the precipice, or you actually drop down it if you're on benefits, and the whole number of people now are on nothing at all and trying to scrape in begging on the street. Homelessness on the street is now something that is becoming a growth industry, the only growth industry that we have in Britain at the moment. And I do think this government is nasty, but it is also weak. People see the U-turns, people see the scandals, people see the divisions. This is not Thatcher with a 179 majority. This is a Tory government who didn't even have a majority of 1. They were a minority government. They started weak and they are even weaker. There's a U-turn every week. This week, fortunately, they were going to push through where the health service had to open every single bit of itself up to privatisation, and with quite a small sort of, short, quick campaign, they've abandoned that proposal. And I think this government can be made to turn back, can be stopped. And what's the tragedy, right, is that there aren't enough of the unions like the PCS who are doing the balloting, who are saying that they want to fight. But actually, despite that, my feeling is that wherever they try and close a hospital, wherever they try and close a clinic, wherever they make redundancies, a campaign springs up. When they attack the bedroom tax, people who are some of the most vulnerable people in society, a campaign springs up. There is a response of people wanting to do something. And when we had mass meetings at work over the 500 redundancies, and we said, obviously, jobs are a big problem at the moment, but do you want to fight over pay? Actually, they said, if our union's serious on a fight over pay, then we do want to fight over pay as well. People want unity. People know that the greatest thing about the pensions strike was it wasn't just us at Bolton, it wasn't just us in the health service, it wasn't just us sort of, you know, across the one bit of the public sector, but we had a huge number of people fighting together. And I think people do want to fight together. You ask them and they do, but what they want is to be asked to do that properly and confidently by their unions, and we have to fight to do that. And that does mean fighting over every clinic and every hospital closure, because that helps to make us feel more confident. But it also means taking civil servants into our hospitals, into our councils, into where we work, and showing that it is possible to fight, and we could do that too. And I think that solidarity is growing. I think the desire for solidarity is growing. I think the motivation to do something, because the world is not getting better, and doing something is not an alternative. My union said at one point, let's just wait till 2015, let's join the Labour Party and try and make it the Labour government that we want. And I think what will be left if we wait till 2015, and also can we guarantee that Labour government isn't going to do what it did in the last Labour government and support the market and everything else. Mobilise and organise it, to nurture every bit, to make sure when we do fight. And that's why these sort of meetings are so fantastic, because what they represent is a desire and a sense to have that unity, to fight together, to move forward. I remember they said that you know, this government, we're all in this together when it comes to austerity. Well, I don't think anybody ever believed that we're all in it together with the millionaires and the capitalists. But I do think working class people in Britain know we are all in together, and we are going to fight for the country and the life and the style that we want and that we deserve and that we can afford. And I think we have to move forward and motivate people to do that.
I'm just reading out, I've just been handed a message from Liz Lawrence, who's the Vice President of UCU, which is the University Union. Best wishes to delegates to the Unite the Resistance Conference in Sheffield. I hope you have a useful day and can take steps forward in building the resistance to the government's offensive on public services, jobs, pensions and living standards. Thank you to those UCU members who campaigned for the left candidates in the recent NEC elections. We need to resist the class war that is being waged by this government on the working population of this country, and to link up with workers internationally in resisting austerity. So a message of support to the conference from the UCU. The next speaker I'm going to introduce is Alan Gibbons. Alan is a children's author. He's also a campaigner for the libraries, against the closure of the libraries, and in many other campaigns against the cuts. So, Alan Gibbons.
I'm a writer, so I've got my notes in a little red book. Right. The first thing I think we've got to say is austerity has failed. In their terms, in the ruling class's terms, austerity has failed. I don't want to sound like Monty Python, but it's kaput, defunct, shagged out, knackered. The whole damn thing is totally bollocks. Let's go through it. They have lost their AAA rating. Now this is absolutely brilliant. George Osborne said, judge me on this. This far and no further. The only thing that matters is the AA rating. Nothing else. Renada. Nothing. And now it's gone, he says, it doesn't matter. We've got a fall in manufacturing. The other thing that George Osborne said, absolutely, we had to retain at every moment the March of the Makers. Do you remember that? There's Ronnie, he's one of these makers. March of the Makers, get behind him. We're going to reconstruct it. Every time a public sector job is lost and manufacturing is collapsing. Unbelievable. This is the strategy of this government. Interestingly, what Karen said about the feeling in the country, recent survey, the government has said, we will work. There is no alternative. Biggest survey done of what people thought, only 1 in 5 people think cuts are working to restore the UK economy. Now that means that however demoralised, however defeated, I keep meeting library workers who are terrified of losing their jobs, feel under the cosh. But I tell you what, They're not accepting it. They're not ideologically convinced by it. They're scared at the moment. But any real concerted fight back can turn that desperate anger and fear into a fire of resistance. It is a chemical moment. We can't say when that comes, but we must not say just because things are bad now, it can't be better in the future. And what we have to do, is not abstain and say, let's wait for it. If you wait for it, we're all dead tomorrow. What we've got to do is fan every flame of resistance. Now, I'm not a representative of, any sort of body that can call action, can call strikes. I'm a scribbler, that's what I am. But I do love trade unions. I love them so much, I'm the member of two, the Society of Authors and the National Union of Teachers. I have been in my own bed 4 days in 5 weeks. Now that means I go around campaigning. And do you know what I campaign against? I campaign against this triple dipstick George Osborne. You take a look at this lunatic. He and his mate, Mr. Cameron, I forgot his bloody name. These public school idiots, honest to God, they claim the LBR, which is their fig leaf to cover their nuts, they claim the LBR says that there is no effect of austerity on the economy. And then their mate, their fig leaf, he goes Robert Choate and says, actually there is. And that is the last nail in the coffin of any sense that austerity could work. And look at the bloody cheek of these people. There is no magic money tree. There is no, have they not heard of quantitative easing? They've got £375 billion of money tree, and that's why they're a monetary commission, to observe all this. So, I think they've got a strategy. Make working people pay. Make them carry the cost of the crisis, but they did nothing to cause it. I mean, anybody here cause a flight of the money out of the country? Did you do that? Did anybody here collapse a bank? I don't remember doing it. Sorry, where's my bank collapsing equipment? Didn't do it. We did not cause this crisis. But what it's done, Karen's absolutely right. It has given them opportunities that they didn't even have wet dreams about under Thatcher. That's the reality. Look at what they're doing. Destroy the National Health Service. We all grew up in the shadow of the National Health Service. We defined ourselves as socialists and radicals by the gains of the Labour government in 1945 to 51. It created the public discourse of what we did, and they are trying to destroy it. They are scrapping education maintenance allowance. Remember that? Gone. Demolish comprehensive education. Now, we've got head teachers, 27 years old, who've not done a teacher training degree. Can you even imagine that could have been possible in the past? This is insane. You couldn't make it up. It's like some fruitcake has thought, the nuttiest idea in the world, we'll do it. And that is this government. The sickest thing of the lot, together with the NHS, right at the heart of the project of 1945 to 51, was to be able to say, we will not allow the poor to be destroyed. We will make sure if you're poor, you're sick, you're afraid, you will have a security blanket to defend your interests and your conditions. We will not go back to the 30s. Clement Attlee worked in the 30s in these poor, desperate areas. And he said, thus far and no further. And now they aim to destroy the welfare state, to deconstruct it completely. It is happening before our eyes. So the problem is not working people. The problem is not we've luxuriated in too much wealth over many years. The problem is not that we're not cutting the deficit far enough. These are all the ludicrous, witch doctory kind of comments they come up with. There's one problem, and it's called the depression. We're not making stuff. People are not earning from making stuff. And so when you don't earn, you don't buy stuff. And if you don't buy stuff, other stuff doesn't get made. It's not difficult. Oh, George, it's obvious. And yet, what they're doing, number one, they're incompetent. Number two, they're vicious. Now, why, Karen's question, how come there's this conundrum that, yeah, they are weak. They don't have the kind of results in Parliament. They don't have the number of seats. The Tories have not won a general election since 1992. Keep reminding people of that. They've no democratic mandate. Why are the buggers still there? I think one of the reasons, I have to say it, I'm sad saying this, one of the reasons is what's happening in the Labour councils. Because when people look and they see something horrible happening, you know what they do next? They look for an alternative. And when you've got 3 political parties, not 2, subscribing to austerity, Ed Ball saying we'll have to keep all the cuts in the next election, people despair of not seeing an alternative. In Liverpool, there's massive cuts. I detect you're a Liverpudlian there, you know. And I'm not, I'm a woolly back. I fell in love with a Scouser and stayed there. So I go on these demos. I go on these demos in Liverpool and I denounce in a full-page article in the Liverpool Echo a Labour council that scurries round handing redundancy notices, that closes libraries. And I got an email of Joe Anderson, the head of the Labour Council, and he invited me to go into his parlour, give me an ooh, right? Go into my parlour mud, and he said he'd show me why there's no money left. This is like the idiot Liam Byrne, who leaves a note, which is a gift to the Tories. There's no money left. I don't care. In the policies of the Labour, I don't care if you've accepted those cuts and you implement on working people. If you're a conduit, a transmission belt for cuts, I don't care if you say your present budget doesn't have the money for the libraries. I say you should stand up and fight the Tories. Yeah. Party members, because I don't want to see people slagging each other's off. Some of my best friends are Labour activists, right? I don't believe we will get working class representation through the Labour Party. I don't think the Labour left's ever been so weak. I think we have to grasp the nettle and start to have the discussions about building a new independent working class representation. However, we are comrades in the struggle. And I'd say the best thing, let's test it in practice. I'm not going to go and slag off Labour Party members. I want to build something independent. I'll be going to, the People's Assembly, bodies like Unite the Resistance, Coalition of Resistance. Anybody who wants to fight, I am your brother. Simple as that. And then, if we can start to test it, try to build that sort of engine of independent working class representation, if it can support left-wingers inside the Labour Party, great. We work together in united action. We'll differ on which party we should be in. We don't tear lumps out of each other, because the real enemy is the Tories. And we'll test who's correct in the joint battle against the Tories. And that essentially is what I've got to say. One little warning is what's behind us. Because the truth is, horrible as Cameron is, horrible as Osborne is, and when I debate with some of these people, I'm involved in campaigning, I've argued till I'm blue in the face with Ed Vaizey, right? I meet these people. They don't look like the old Tories. The old Tories, at least they looked ugly. Nicholas Ridley was the ugliest man I've ever seen. The new breed, they're all pretty. Ed Vaizey's pretty. David Cameron's pretty. All right, George Osborne's ugly. Eric Pickles is pretty. No. But I'll tell you what. Behind them is people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, absolutely to the right of Genghis Bloody Khan. Liam Fox, corrupt as hell. Remember what he did? Involved in all these right-wing bodies, touring the world and everything. David Laws of the Lib Dems, fiddles his exes. Next minute he's talking as if there's no problem. All these people, right? We have got politics forming, and you can see it in the vote for UKIP, which is dangerous and ugly. And when working people, if we don't fire the resistance, then working people without an alternative, like they did in places like Rotherham, will start to look at the ugly forces like UKIP. They'll blame the immigrants. they'll blame the Muslims, they'll blame the black people. It's the same old crap we got in the 1930s. They will most of all blame the poor. Because if you are poor on a rotting council estate and you don't have an alternative, who do you look at to blame? You can't see Sainsbury and all these people. You can't see the Lords. You will see the guy up the road who's unemployed. You'll see the disabled person who's easy to take a pop at. And you will then blame them. And we'll get an ugly right-wing shift in British politics. So today we're not just fighting to rebuild working class organisation, to fight back over cuts and redundancies. We are fighting for the soul of this country and for a better world.
Okay, thanks very much, Alan. Mark Spock is going to be our next speaker, who's from the PCS unit. So without any further ado, I'll introduce Mark.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to today. And I think it is a fantastic turnout, and it's a really, really good sign that there is a mood here in order to try and challenge what's going on. What I want to talk about is, picking up from some of the excellent speeches, is why is there a contradiction that the government is weak and yet it's unleashing the biggest assault on working class people ever? Why, even though most people can see what they're doing is wrong, do they continue to do it and actually do it at a faster rate? And what does that tell us about our own side and the weaknesses that they are exploiting that we should be able to stop? Because if everything we've heard today is true, and it is, the majority of people don't agree with it, the majority of people are suffering, the majority of people can see that this is the rich governing for themselves against the poor, you have to ask yourself the question then, how are they still getting away with it? And that's what I wanted to talk about today, which is what we should argue as an alternative and how we want to try and do something about it. But my starting point is this. The AAA rating is gone. Absolutely agree with the speakers who said Osborne said that that's what we should judge him on, and he's failed. So he's absolutely shown he's economically incompetent. Most serious economists are now saying, agreeing with Nobel Prize winners like Stiglitz and Krugman, that actually what they're doing is the completely wrong thing. They need to borrow and they need to invest and we need to grow the economy. But they're ignoring it. The day the AAA rating was gone, Cameron did a speech in the House of Commons. I was in that day, the Ministry of Justice headquarters, about to do a PCS members meeting. And Cameron was on a big screen, live on the news. And what Cameron said is, the loss of the AAA rating shows we've got to cut further, we've got to cut faster, and we've got to cut deeper. And therefore that is the clearest signal of all that they're not going to start holding back. They're going to go for it more and more and more. They're going to seek to divide people. They're going to attack those who can least afford it, and they're going to hope that they're going to get away with it. And I think we have to say, 2.5 years into this coalition government, they have got away with an awful lot. And they've got away with it because the Labour movement, and I include in that all people on the left, right through the political organisations and political parties, and crucially the trade unions, have not been able to effectively stop them. And I start really from this position that if we don't turn this round, when we look at history and we look back at this period, many of us, I think, will have to hang our heads in shame and say, how could they get away with all of that when we still represent millions of people and it's so obvious what we need to do? Now, I'm starting from this, not because I'm going to be gloomy. I'm very, very optimistic that Wales will thrash England at the rugby. Never. I'm even more optimistic that Cardiff will pick up the points of Hillsborough later on. I start with that because I think just knowing what's wrong and hoping we'll turn the tide is not enough. If we don't change what we're doing, then they will do more and more and more of it, and we will suffer more and more. So I think it starts for us then with having to advocate an alternative. We do want to unite the resistance, we want to stop what they're doing. But you know, I think what people want to hear is an alternative. And frankly, they don't hear it from Labour. They are not hearing a political alternative in the way they did in 1945, in the way they did when the Labour left was at its height in the 70s and 80s. They don't hear it. What they now hear is when Ed Balls wants to oppose the benefit cap, which is great, he justifies it by saying we support the public sector pay freeze. It's not good enough. We need some radical alternative politics that's going to make people think there is a way through it. Because my experience is if people don't think there's an alternative, you can't convince them to fight. Because if they think it's all inevitable, why would they put up a fight? So PCS has recently issued a 10-point programme for trying to turn this around and try and rebuild our economy and to fight against austerity. And this is not an alternative economic strategy. I don't hold myself up as any great theoretician, but they're 10 simple points that we think we could unite people around that could really give a boost to what we're doing. The first one is that we've got to break the pay freeze. We have got to break the pay freeze in the public and private sector because as a result of the government's policies, £50 billion has been taken out of the economy that should be in working people's pockets. If £50 billion was in working people's pockets, they would spend it. If they spend it, it would boost the economy. So we don't want to be mealy-mouthed about it. We need to smash the pay freeze that for PCS members who will be going on strike in a few days' time has actually meant a 18% cut in living standards in 5 years. £1,200 a year for some of the lowest paid public sector workers in the UK. So we need to break the pay freeze and we need people to advocate that politically. We need to increase the minimum wage. Unite's done some excellent stuff on the minimum wage. The reality is the minimum wage is completely unacceptably at a low level. But even comparing it with inflation over the last few years, if it had kept pace with inflation, it would be 6% higher than it is. We need to stop cutting jobs. We need to cut through all the crap and say we should oppose every single cut in public spending wherever it is. Now, some people think this is controversial. I've said this at the TUC, and Brendan Barber, God bless him, before he retired, looked at me like I was nuts. But the argument is quite simple. One, if you don't oppose all the cuts, you have to support some, logically. You'll end up choosing between different working people. Who's more important? Qualified teachers or classroom assistants? People who work in libraries or people who work in home care? People who work in job centres or people who work in tax offices? I think what we say is every single one of them is as important as each other. Because every time you cut a job, somebody is not working, they're not productively doing something for society, they don't pay tax, they don't pay national insurance, and often they claim social security. And therefore, even economically, it is madness to cut jobs. And just get a scale of it, 300,000 jobs in the public sector alone have gone since 2010. That is more jobs gone in 2.5 years than the entire workforce in the mining industry when it was over 250,000 and when they fought so bravely in the 1980s. 75,000 have gone in the civil service in the last 2.5 years. So these are fairly straightforward things that should appeal to everyone, but we've got to go further. We should say, boldly and loudly, the time has come to do something about the spiralling cost of housing benefit. 23 billion is too much money, so the answer is cap the rents. Don't stop the money, go to those cap the rents, there would instantly be more money for people in the public and private sector to be able to spend rather than it going to landlords who are trousering it. We need to call for investment. And we need to say, and be proud to say it, investment means borrowing. What is wrong with saying we need to borrow money? Anyone who looks at the economy in Britain over the last 80 years will see that it is legitimate to borrow money to grow the economy, to reduce the deficit over a period of time. When Labour shy away from saying we should borrow more, we have to pin them down and say you have to borrow your way out of this problem, and increasingly it's what economists are saying throughout Europe. We should say scrap the work programme. Scrap the work programme. Not welfare, it's not benefits. Social security should be there as a safety net for everybody who needs it when they fall upon times. We've all fallen for this bollocks that's come from Labour and the Tories, it has to be said, that stigmatises those out of work, blaming them for the fact they haven't got jobs, even though we know that there's not enough jobs to go around for a fraction of those people who are out of work. You know, if we had a bold campaign to increase social security benefits, people would see the logic of our argument. Just take this one fact. In 1979, job seekers allowance, or then unemployment benefit, was worth 21% of average earnings. Today, job seekers allowance is worth 11% of average earnings. What difference does that make? If it had kept pace with average earnings, it wouldn't be 71 quid job seekers allowance, it would now be £130 a week. And ditto for our pensioners. So we need to increase the support that the state gives to people when they need it, rather than make them live in poverty. I want to agree with Karen. One of these 10 points has to be scrap Trident and scrap all nuclear weapons. If we scrap Trident, not only does that make a mass appeal to so many people, it throws up billions and billions and billions of pounds for our economy. We should close the tax gap. We should do something about the richest in our society who are getting richer. The £123 billion that goes uncollected through avoided, evaded, or uncollected tax. If that £123 billion was in our pockets, there would not need to be a single cut anywhere, and there would be a healthy surplus. And finally, we should reverse the tax cuts for millionaires. We should say when this comes in on the 5th of April that it is completely unjust, and we shouldn't just say stop the tax cut for millionaires and put it back to 50p. We should say, as good old Dennis Healey in his era in the Labour Party certainly was saying, tax them till the pips squeak. Because we should be saying that not 50%. They're not going to fly out of the country and leave all their assets behind and all run away, and if they do, frankly, it'd be good riddance to them. It's TUC policy that you never hear anybody say, which would make a massive difference, is nationalise the banks. If we nationalise the banks in Britain and had the banking system working for people rather than spivs and speculators, it will transform the economy. Now, those modest 10 demands, were they to be implemented, would transform everybody's lives, would transform the length and breadth of the country, from the poorest and most vulnerable people to people who are at work and are trying to make ends meet. But the point is, optimistic as I am, none of that is going to be put forward by George Osborne. The other point is, unfortunately, Ed Balls isn't going to put a lot of this forward. And therefore, what we have to do is build a movement that pressures those in political life, particularly those on the left, to start embracing a bit more radical politics, because it's what people need. And they need to be inspired, and they need to believe that we can change it around. So the question therefore has to be, what have we got to do in order to create those conditions? Now, comrades, I always believe in looking at the world as it is. We're having this meeting following, in recent times, the single biggest strike we saw in Britain for generations, when 2 million people went on strike on the 30th of November against pensions. It was the high watermark of trade unionism in Britain for years. But we have to acknowledge that less than 21 days later, that coalition collapsed. Francis Maude was claiming there was only one union in Britain, the BCS, who still opposed his plans. That wasn't true. But what was true is union after union that had told their members to strike on November the 30th were now telling their members that they should accept what was on offer. And we have to understand that that has caused some crisis of confidence in the workplace. When PCS has recently done its ballot, on our own, trying to fight against all the effects of austerity, it was the hardest ballot we've ever had to win. And I tell you why. Because what members would say to us is, if we couldn't win with 2 million with 29 unions, what chance have we got on our own? And by the way, where is everybody else? And I think you have to have an honest discussion with people. I'll be honest with you and say, when we went on strike, I wrote personally to every single union affiliated to the TUC, asking for a meeting and asking to discuss coordinated strike action. 4 unions replied. 4 unions even replied to a letter suggesting that we need to have a meeting. And that tells us that we've got some issues that we need to sort through. It tells us that we have had to adjust what we're doing to really key in what we're fighting for members in the civil service. So we're fighting for a decent pay rise, stop the attack on our pensions, the ripping up of our terms and conditions, amongst other things. And we are going to mount a campaign to try and force our employer on the table. But I tell you what would make that campaign instantly 100 times easier to wage is if other unions piled in on behalf of their own issues, and we started trying to coordinate and cooperate and have a series of industrial action. And I think the task therefore has to be for activists and unions to be raising within your structures, what are you doing about fighting the attacks that you are facing? What is happening with the leaderships to ensure that we're talking to each other, that we're actually trying to ensure that we can cooperate? And in that sense, I think our strike on Wednesday is extraordinarily significant. Because we will call out 250,000 people on strike on Budget Day. We've already announced that that's going to be followed up with a further half-day strike on the 5th of April, which is a further strike designed to be done on the last day of the tax year to expose all sorts of problems with cuts and the fact that millionaires are going to be better off that day while our members will be paying more for their pension. So we've announced already a day-and-a-half strike action over 3 weeks. We will then have 2 months of strikes targeted around the country to be done at the time that is going to have most effect in the areas that our members work. But at the TUC pre-budget rally earlier in the week, on behalf of my union, we threw up another suggestion, and that suggestion is this. The 26th of June is the day that George Osborne will announce the comprehensive spending review. It is a more significant day in many ways in the budget, because he sets out public spending plans for the next 3 years. He will announce a butchery of public spending, and that's still 3 months away. Wouldn't it be fantastic if on the 26th of June we had mass strikes, mass demonstrations, mass protests, uniting everybody across the country, so that when he's up in Parliament giving it this, we are out on the streets the length and the breadth of the country saying we are... That is possible. We did it once, we can do it again, and that's what we should work towards doing. In the meantime, we need every single trade unionist and campaigner to be supporting what we're doing on Wednesday. Wednesday's not going to be easy for us. People are being bombarded already by propaganda, by a government that is getting more and more vicious. Do you know, in the last week, they have announced, Eric Pickles, that in DCMG, he is about to stop the facility where they collect union dues direct from people's pay packets. Inevitably, it's going to follow everywhere else in the civil service. 94% of our income comes from people paying their union subs through their pay packets. It is designed to cripple the union financially. At the same time, they're cutting the time off our reps have at work by 66%. At the same time, they've started victimizing some of our key activists in the workplace, giving the message that if we can victimize the steward, the person who stands up for you, you will cower down and you will accept that nothing can be done. In this city, Lee Rock, who's one of our top stewards in the DWP Sheffield branch, has been sacked on trumped-up charges that for us are all about trade union victimization. Our national union will be supporting our Sheffield branch. We will support the submission when it comes for a strike, and we will ask trade unionists in Sheffield to stand up and support what we're doing. Anyone who thinks that these things can never be won, look at what's just happened in London Met. Jawad Steve and Max Watson, victimised, suspended from work for 3 weeks on trumped-up charges. Mass meeting on Holloway Road 2 weeks ago. Within less than a week, they are all reinstated. I think we can see what we've got to be doing. We've got to support all the campaigns, large and small, support those unions when they swing into action, encourage people to be supportive in the community, but also at national level in their union. And I'll finish with this. You know, it's easy sometimes at events like this to think it's all really dreadful, it's gloomy, we should fight back, but actually can we win? And I think we've got to say absolutely we can win. Even within the PCS on its own in the last few months. We have stopped compulsory redundancy notices in the DWP because members voted to strike. Do you remember last year before the Olympics? Yeah. When our staff in the Home Office, including airports and passports, were going to strike the night before the Olympics, all hell broke loose. All hell broke loose. Newspapers calling for people to be sacked, to change the law. We started getting hate mail. We started getting people writing to say, I should be deported to North Korea. We started getting people saying, this is a disgrace. The best one of all I'll never forget is that I was a disgrace. I should not fit to breathe the air that normal people breathe in Britain, and I should go now and take the leaders of unison with me. Now, I've often tried to analyse that letter. I'm still trying to work out what it really means. But I think the point is, 1,100 extra permanent jobs were conceded by the Home Office that are currently at our airports and ports. 1,100 public sector jobs, meaning that the service has begun to try and claw itself back. It shows when you fight you can win. But the point is, we don't want to just be fighting, important as it is, for these issues that are just for us. We want to build a fight that actually can stop the government in its tracks. Stop just defending ourselves and actually go on the offensive. If we get our unions up to that challenge, if we unite with the DPACs and the UK Uncut and everybody else who's campaigning at the grassroots level, the tide can turn. But comrades, time is running out. Every day that passes, living standards go down further, jobs are being cut, services are being closed, privatisations take place. So this is urgent. I hope therefore everyone will support us on Wednesday, support us again on the 5th of April, support us in Sheffield with our fight against the victimisation of Lee, and that all of us ensure that our unions work together, because by God do our people need to see that more than ever before.
I feel really inspired and energised by what people have said this morning. We've got about 15 minutes for discussion now, and we really are going to make sure that we finish at 1 o'clock so that we can all go up to the town hall to join the bedroom tax protest. And of course this afternoon we'll be coming back for workshops where we can further...
I want to take up that theme of the importance of what we're fighting for. Most people will have heard of Longley Park, but I want to give you one figure that tells you about the importance. In 2003, across Sheffield, there was 10 black students got to university, the 4th largest city in Britain. Longley Park Sixth Form College has transformed that situation, has transformed lives for black and minority ethnic people and for poorer students in particular. It's very, very important. On the 15th of January this year, the skies fell on Longley Park, and a budget cut of 1.3 million, that's 20% of the budget. It would be 25% of the teaching to be cut at Longley Park Sixth Form College. And that figure, ironically, is somewhere just about in the middle between what the entire welfare state is going to be cut by and the Greek situation. Okay, so we had that. And this theme that we have about what can we do, there's nothing there, there's no alternative, and so on. The staff, I think, at the beginning was split right down, we were pulled to both of those arguments. Pulled to the argument about, oh, that's terrible, there was floods of tears everywhere. But also pulled to the argument, well, we have to fight. There's no alternative to fighting. This is a massive assault on us. It's a massive assault on our service. And from that point, we've had pretty much full weekly meetings of NUT members. I've been gone week by week thinking, well, no, I can't push it again. I can't ask you to come out to meetings again. And they love it. There's an idea that there's not an alternative just isn't there anymore. I put together very carefully a very careful sets of numbers about where they could move the money around and so on. That's been kind of important in terms of setting the agenda that there is an alternative. But the members don't care about that anymore. The money's got to be found to save the service and save people's jobs. We got to a situation, we have a ballot with 95% support for strike action. We got to a situation just over a week ago where we pretty much got a guarantee that there would be no compulsory redundancies out of that. There's no, that didn't stop the movement. We went ahead with plans for a strike this week gone on the Thursday. As it turns out, we had a very successful negotiations on Wednesday afternoon at the last minute, and one not just on no compulsory redundancies, but they would be talking to us very, very closely about saving temporary contracts, renewing temporary contracts, which is certainly a bit further than I thought we would get. So I'm really pleased about that. We had that unhappy circumstance this week in our negotiations of the threat of a strike on Thursday, and it just happened to coincide with an Ofsted visit that week as well. So there was massive pressure put on there. But I feel I've been living in a microcosm of what people are talking about here. Massive attacks on us, which shouldn't be underestimated. But actually, through resistance, through activism actually, it's been possible to keep people together, to keep them moving forward, and to set an alternative. Not just to say to our management that we won't put up with your cuts, but to set and train a movement. And our NUT group has grown by a third over the course of this, so we've been very, very pleased about that.
thank you, and as a fellow member of the NUT, I really want to congratulate the staff at Longley College, because I think it's a very significant victory, actually. I think it's very important. So well done to them. We do have a couple of minutes. I've got a few people that I'm going to bring in to speak about various other campaigns. And if you've got something you would like to say, just indicate. But I want to bring in...
Yesterday, GMB school cleaners went on strike, on a one-day strike in Sheffield, because they're demanding the living wage. What's happened in the council is they've contracted out the cleaning services as part of their great shift towards privatising services. The council has agreed to implement the living wage for the 200 or so lowest paid workers in the council, but the contractors that they pass the work out to have refused to implement it. So yesterday, a group of cleaners who work for an organisation called Carillion went on strike and were campaigning in the city centre. They sent their apologies. One of them was going to come and speak to me today, but she's had a family crisis and not been able to come. And I think it's absolutely criminal that we have a council that's contracting out but is not insisting that actually their workers are paid something like the minimum wage. We're talking around £7.20, £7.50, which I don't imagine how anyone can live on even that, to be honest, but that's not considered to be something that they're prepared to do. They're hoping that they will, their campaign will have success, and the GMB is intending to then ballot other private contractors like Kia and others who are doing exactly the same and refusing to actually pay the living wage to their cleaners. So there's going to be an ongoing campaign developing in Sheffield around that. Some of the criticisms have been very interesting because what the council has done is implemented a 1% pay rise this year for everybody who works in the council, which is well below the inflation, and it's on the back of a 3-year pay freeze, and we'll have a 4th year of increment freezes. So while they're trumpeting that they've actually paid the living wage to their smallest group of low-paid workers, those workers aren't getting anything like a decent pay rise, which everybody should be getting. So it's a mixed bag in that sense. But I think it's really important because the impact of privatisation, as everybody knows, is that wages and services are driven down. And what's interesting is a number of the cleaners have been saying they're now forced onto benefits to supplement really poor wages. So basically our benefit system's being used to allow contractors to carry on making profits because they won't pay decent wages. It's an absurdity on all sorts of levels. So we've got some petitions outside on the table. If people would take them, start handing them around, circulate them around your workplace and get them into the GMB office. And then as further news of the campaign develops, we will let you know. We thank you for support.
Thank you. Actually, I'm just realising that these clocks that are behind me are a little bit slow, so I am going to move it on now because I want to get Phil to speak just briefly about the way that the workshops are going to work this afternoon.
Just two very quick things first. Next Wednesday on the PCS strike day, we have through PCS organised a march and rally at 12 o'clock at Moor Foot, which we're marching up to a rally at the town hall. That's the first thing. We will get publicity out about that shortly. Second thing, just to briefly say about the steering committee, we shouldn't be forgetting that today because we do need organisation. I mean, all the activities that people have described, we do need to see why, if we're organised, actually we can make a difference. You know, we might be in a minority, but actually we can take initiatives and we can start to push the union leaders and actually become a part of the track. Because all the strikes and disputes we've been talking about today are where people have said enough is enough and we're going to have a go. And I think we have to encourage that every bit of the way. So when it comes to the final session, please put forward suggestions for names for the steering committee.
Thanks for the conference allowing me to speak. Thanks for the kind words of General Secretary for the support from the National Union. My name's Lee Rock and I'm one of the reps that worked in the contact centre in
Speak up, Lee.
Sorry, I'm one of the reps from PCS. I work in the contact centre in town. I've been on the left wing now for 30 years. I started off as a young lad working in the Socialist Workers' Party. I've been employed now for 27 years. For all of that time, I've been a trade union rep of one description or another, serving on the group executive for a year, and regional organiser, etc., etc. And facing these attacks, there's a leaflet gone round which goes into the details. And I've been sacked on what Mark's rightly described as trumped-up charges in terms of the sickness procedures. The fact of the matter is, management have made a number of references to my trade union activity. We've now got documents that they show that they've actually been doctored, documents about my case. So there's a whole range of things. Now I think the important thing is, so I'm going to be really quick, is that the members in my workplace have voted to strike to get me reinstated. I think that's absolutely important. What we've also voted at, we had our AGM, a very well attended AGM, that if my workplace striking doesn't get me reinstated, then we will ballot the branch to get me reinstated, and that's gone through the unanimous vote in our branch as well, and these are well attended meetings. It's also the case, I was sacked on the 23rd of February, which was towards the end of the PCS branch AGM season, and yet we've still, I've been told from somebody from Standing Orders today, that we've still got 14 branches in the DWP have put emergency motions up already, actually managed to get it in the deadlines, calling for strike action in support of me across the contact centre network. So that is really, really good and really supportive to concentrate management's minds that they might see it as an attack they can get away with. But our members see it as an attack upon the union, and that's what they're going to defend. The key thing is, Mark's talks about the attacks upon facilities and attacks upon reps. The employer knows that the resistance in terms of the national leadership will call the action. In terms often of delivering action on the ground, it comes to our local shop stewards and our local reps. And that's the obstacle on a day-to-day basis on the attacks on individual members. And it's also the problem that they have when it comes to turning out the action. That's the elements they want to silence. And there's probably a few people in here I know that are under that kind of attack as well. And that's going to increase. And I think despite our differences, and people do need to discuss their differences openly on the left, that's the way forward. But when it comes to action, that's when we unite in action. And we're going to see more of these attacks upon reps like me. And I don't take it personally, I take it as, you know, a political attack, obviously. And I think when it comes to that, we must unite and fight in action on every attack, on every shop steward to let
I'm going to wrap it up now because...
Now, for the workshops.
Obviously for next time, because I'm assuming there is going to be a next time, because things are not going to get better on their own, that's something that we'll have to take in mind. I think it's a key message really that we need to discuss here today, is with these little pockets of resistance, the importance of joining together, the importance of joining the struggle together is so obvious, and the scale of attacks is so massive that the scale of the fight back has to be massive as well. And it's interesting within education, we talk about this being a weak government. We've already seen Michael go do a U-turn on the baccalaureate. Thank God, because I've turned into a bit of a scare story person at my school. Some sort of, you know, stories you tell children to get them to go to bed at night. My story that I tell my kids to get them to behave is, well, you've got to do your exam this time because, you know, you don't do it.
But obviously, it hadn't had any effect at all. Management still said they would continue with the downbanding. By this time, we'd actually entered into negotiations with management, and management had requested that ACAS were in attendance. Now this surprised us because they weren't making any additional offers. Before all this started, we had 3 years pay protection. When they announced the dismiss and re-engage, they told us at the same time that our pay protection was going
to
to
have to pay £1,250 to get there in the first place. Now with people at the very bottom on earnings, people who haven't got the money in the bank to pay £1,250 turn to the unions, and the idea is that they'll try and cripple the unions. Because every time we pay that, it's a big chunk of money. If you think that could be 10 years contributions of that member that you're paying just to give them, not to win the case, just access so they can take a tribunal case forward. So those sort of benefits are being hit. So every single time, it isn't, you know, think outside the box, it isn't just about welfare benefits. It's the benefits of working, it's the protections on employment law, which in itself is a benefit to working people. Cuts in health and safety legislation, which has been a benefit we've fought for over the years. And in the long term, that is going to cause more people to be killed or seriously injured at work. So yes, the welfare